That's all we got. Family secrets. The keeping or sharing of them has been the backdrop of many a novel, play, or movie. Some of my favorites, The Count of Monte Cristo and The Man in the Iron Mask, are about the secrets that people are keeping. A recent movie, Knives Out, shows, not going to spoil it, but shows that basically everybody in the cast has a secret. Nobody is who they appear to be. And of course, every soap opera ever made is built on the premise that there are secrets everywhere, twin brothers and all sorts of evil plots afoot, that none of which make any real sense, but keep the drama going. Many of those stories revolve around the question of whether or not the family's dirty laundry ought to be aired in public. If you learn about something shameful in your family, is it right to keep quiet about it? Now, before we continue, note that we're not talking about cases of abuse or neglect. When that is happening, we all have a moral obligation to try to protect victims from their abusers. Hopefully, we have all learned the folly of trying to cover up such sins after seeing so many horror stories like Jerry Sandusky and Larry Nassar and so many others come to light. But what about the shameful things, the foolish things, the indecent acts hidden away in our family's closet? As it turns out, Noah's sons were confronted with one such example. One of them reacted very differently than his brothers. Let's take a look at the text this morning, Genesis 9:18-29. It says this: "The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the three sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered over the whole earth." Up until this point, we haven't learned anything about Noah's sons. They experienced the flood along with their parents and their wives, but the thoughts and emotions of these 8 people have been absent from the Genesis story thus far. Noah has been described as righteous and blameless, and we saw his tremendous patience in waiting to leave the ark. So we know about his character, at least some, but not that of anyone else in this family. So in the end, this one short moment, reflecting a single day's actions and reactions, for these 3 men is basically all we have to go on. It's certainly not enough to enable us to understand who Shem, Ham, and Japheth were. So our focus will be on how the text reacts to their actions and how Noah uses this moment to speak about the future of his descendants in the generations to come. So let's get into it. It says, Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. We learn something new about Noah. Before the flood, he was a farmer. Afterward, Noah returns to his previous work of helping things grow. In this case, he's growing grapes. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. Now there's a time lapse between Noah proceeded to plant a vineyard and Noah drank some of the vine, right? Because it takes a while for these grapes, for those vines to put out grapes. So there was a bit of a time gap between 20 and 21. The idea of drinking fermented liquids is an old one. It's something ancient peoples all over the world did using a variety of ingredients that they had to hand. You'd be surprised how many different things ancient peoples figured out how to ferment and drink. Now, the common characteristics of these drinks is that the fermentation process allows them to be stored safely and transported for later use. And to varying extents, they all have a potency that causes intoxication, some much more than others, as is the case with what they're being made out of. Whether Noah had availed himself of wine prior to the flood, whether he had been drunk before, or if this was the first time for both, we have no idea. It seems like he already knew how to make wine, so this may not have been the first time. We also don't know why Noah drank to excess. Was he celebrating too robustly? Was he drowning his sorrows? We have no indication. He drank, became drunk, passed out. Genesis doesn't actually focus on Noah's choices in this matter. It just tells us that it happened. We began by talking about family secrets. Someone with a substance abuse problem is a pretty common family secret. Most of our family trees contain someone, maybe several someones, who drink too much or who use drugs. Maybe that person was or is you. The interplay between stigma and recovery is a big topic, and there's a lot of opinions about how to best help people recover. I'm not overly qualified to weigh in on that, so I'll leave it alone. But we all know that some families will try to keep the behavior in question a secret, and some will instead mock the one who has that issue. How should we respond if our father, mother, sister, brother, spouse, or child is passed out drunk? What do you do? Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. Now, there are plenty of stories in Genesis and in the rest of the Old Testament about family squabbles, about family dysfunction. Famously, as we continue with Genesis, we're going to see Jacob and his brother Esau. That doesn't go well. Jacob and his two wives, there's an issue, Leah and Rachel. Joseph and his brothers, famously, not getting along well. David and his sons, that didn't go well. Many of those stories end in tragedy of one kind or another. This brief episode does indeed give us some more to ponder about how the human condition is manifested in family dynamics. And we're going to talk about that. But the phrase, the father of Canaan, tells us that Moses includes this story here for a bigger purpose than answering the question, what should a son do if his father is passed out drunk and naked? Right? That's a very specific kind of scenario. Calling him the father of Canaan is a big deal. As we'll see next week in chapter 10, Genesis symbolically considers Noah's three sons to be the ancestors of all the nations that surrounded Israel in Moses' day. We'll consider why that is next week. For now, it's sufficient to say that Ham's actions here have a larger purpose in how Moses is telling this story than the actions themselves would otherwise warrant. You might be wondering, why did this end up in Scripture? It's not that big a deal. It's because of this phrase, the father of Canaan. Small, spur-of-the-moment actions in our lives can have profound consequences. They can be life-changing, certainly. But in this case, what Ham chose to do when he found Noah in his drunken state is magnified into the kind of thing that a Canaanite would do. And that's relevant, of course, to the Israelites at Mount Sinai on their way to Canaan. So what did he do, and why was it so terrible? When Ham saw his father's shameful condition, he chose to broadcast the news of it to his brothers rather than help his father. You might be thinking, well, he panicked. He's just going to get more help. That's a generous thought about Ham, and I appreciate it if that was your first thought. But it doesn't fit this episode as a whole. The upcoming response of Shem and Japheth indicates that either the motives of Ham or how he went about doing what he did, maybe both things, were flawed. in a way that was morally unacceptable, at the very least, morally unacceptable in the ancient Near East, even if we don't quite understand it. It isn't easy to know how to respond to the latest episode of family-related poor behavior. The next thing that your sibling, your cousin, your brother-in-law does, whoever it happens to be. How do I respond to that? But one option taken by many of us that isn't an acceptable choice for one of the followers of Jesus is to gossip about it. Now, I know there is a fine line between a family discussion that's meant to support a troubled family member and one that is self-satisfying as a discussion with that person as the object of mockery or derision. There is a fine line between talking about Cousin Bob's drinking a problem and gossiping about it. We all know the difference. Families do need to talk about problems in people's lives. If you're going to help, you need to talk about it. But you don't need to gossip about it to each other. I think we've all been there. We've known the difference between the two things. Sometimes a conversation that starts as concern for your family member becomes gossip. So these are tough situations. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked in backward and covered their father's naked body. Their faces were turned the other way so they would not see their father naked. However, we characterize what Ham did, and it's clear that Moses' original audience would have been upset by what he did, together with what he failed to do. Those actions are contrasted very strongly here with the actions of Shem and Japheth. If Ham was hasty, they were cautious. If he was insensitive, they were considerate. If he was disrespectful, they went to great lengths to be respectful. We can ponder this episode for what it can tell us about family and human nature. Think about it. All three of these boys are Noah's sons. All three of them endured the flood. All three have been influenced by their father's character up to this point, and all three have witnessed him come back down to earth when they learned that he was passed out drunk from too much wine. These three young men are as alike in circumstance as any trio of siblings. But one of them reacted very differently to a difficult situation than the other two. Why? Simple. Genetics and parenting are not determinative. Genesis teaches us this over and over. Cain killed his brother Abel. They had the same upbringing. Lot turns aside from Abram. They were family. Jacob betrays Esau, his twin brother. Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery. Even within families that God has chosen, these are my people, he has said. Even within those families, some will go their own way. Some will make regrettable, even disastrous decisions. The story of Genesis will tell us this over and over again. Deciding how to react, especially in the moment, to difficult family situations is not easy. Our instinct may be that of self-preservation. What do I do right now to keep this from hurting me? How do I lift myself up from this moment so it doesn't bring me down? That may be our instinct. But of course, we need to rise above that self-centered focus and seek to work on the side of trying to make things better. Sometimes that will mean holding it as a private family matter. Sometimes that is the right decision. We can better encourage and help this person on private grounds. At other times, we may need to bring the situation out into the open because the resources needed are beyond what the family has. In the end, we must do our best with what we have to work with. It's not always going to be enough, though. Sometimes those we love aren't ready to receive help. Sometimes they'll choose self-destructive paths instead. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." Noah's reaction might not sit well with us. After all, he was the one whose drunkenness started this whole mess. Why is he upset with someone else? We actually don't know anything about how Ham responded to this. Did he apologize to his father? Were they reconciled after this? Was all forgiven and life went back to normal? We have no idea because we don't know any more of this story than this moment. Notice that Noah's curse, and this is a clue to us, isn't about Ham at all. The curse is about the symbolic descendants of Ham, the Canaanites. Next week's message in chapter 10 will further illustrate this idea. Ham isn't Cain's biological ancestor. He's their behavioral ancestor. And that is a common trope in ancient Near Eastern stories. The idea that you acted like this, so you're the father of everyone else who acts like this. You inspired them. You were their type cast, or so to speak. It's that mindset, that lack of morality, that arouses Noah's anger. His curse is his hope that an attitude that doesn't put family first, even when that family isn't 100% worthy of your kindness or your honor, he's hoping that that attitude will not prevail in the generations to come, but rather it will be a slave to the sort of upright behavior of Shem and Japheth. 26, he also said, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend Japheth's territory. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be the slave of Japheth." In contrast with Noah's anger at Ham, he has words of blessing for his other two sons. He asks the Lord to bless their descendants, and by extension, those who behave as they did, which Noah appreciated, it seems, a great deal. And so we come to the end. After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. Noah lived a total of 950 years, and then he died. We come to the end of Noah's story. It has a nice symbolic round number in it that ancient Near Eastern writers and audiences appreciated. While the flood narrative definitely taught us about Noah's righteousness and his patience and his trust in God and how it was rewarded, our understanding of his life is fairly narrow, as we only see one epic adventure and one regrettable moment. That's all we know about Noah. The same sort of brief glimpses were given to us in the first chapters of Genesis about Adam and Eve and about Cain and Abel. But beginning in chapter 12, we will see a much more detailed lives of the people that come into the story. We're going to learn a lot about Abraham and his wife Sarah, about Isaac and Rebekah, about Jacob and Esau, and of course Jacob, Leah, and Rachel. And we will end with a long look at the life of Joseph and his brothers. We're about to learn a whole lot more, the good, the bad, and the ugly, about this particular family tree, the one that God is choosing to bless. But before we get there, chapter 10 and chapter 11, the rest of this, will pull back and look at the big picture of humanity. Whole tribes and kingdoms will be in view to remind us that God had a lot of choices when Abram came along. He picked him out of that whole group. That's where we're headed next week. 3 quick things to take from this. Family situations, especially ones revolving around poor choices or shameful behavior, are difficult to respond well to. They are. However, it's important that we do so as best as we can. Secondly, Ham reacted poorly to a situation not of his own making, but he did react poorly to it. On the flip side, Shem and Japheth reacted well to a situation not of their own making and were commended for it.